Hello friends, thank you for joining me today. My name's Dan, and today I'm working on, among other things, I'm working on illustrations for a book. Let's get legal, let's get official. So this is Daily Art Adventure number 546, Developing Illustrations. There, now we're real. Hey, thanks for watching. So, I have several illustrations at several different stages of development. This is a first rough draft. By the way, this is the biography of a Southern hero named James Coker, C-O-K-E-R. I'll maybe tell you a little bit about him as the story goes along. His great-grandson, I think, who's about my age, is working on his biography. Anyway, this is a rough sketch that my client hasn't even seen yet, so that's one level. So I've got to work on that. I'll work on that in a minute and tell you more about it. Here is another sketch that my client has seen. This is a copy of it, and he's come back with a couple suggestions for modification. Very reasonable stuff. Now, taking to a next level of completion, here's another illustration that my client has seen, and he had a couple changes. One, he wanted to make this rows of a tilled land, a field with rows in it. I'm losing the words at the moment. Also, since we started this project a month or two ago, my client, the author, has changed his mind. Again, pretty typical thing for an illustrator to deal with. When at first he was thinking of aiming for an adult and early pubescent, young, prepubescent, like 10 to 12, 9 to 12-year-old children, not little kids, but older children. He has since changed his mind, and he wants to make it just aim at adults only. So I actually think that's probably a good idea. And here's a third illustration that I did for him. So these both need to be redone, frankly, in a more adult style. And a good question will be, well, what does that mean? What is adult style? And in my mind, it has mostly to do with the treatment of the illustration itself. He had a couple minor modifications to this face and hair and the field, but mostly, in my mind, if we're only aiming for adults, I'm going to try to draw this with a little different hand, a little bit sketchier lines, a little bit more mature lines, I would say, not quite as, this one in particular, the lines are quite firm. So that was aiming at a child market but trying to make it accessible to adults. This one I don't need to modify as much, but I just think I'm going to treat it with a little different hand. I'll tell you more about the technique that I'm using, and I'm still really not completely settled on which technique I want to use for these illustrations. You can see I used a slightly different technique for these two. Thus the difference. This is more airy and lighter colored and frosty, and this one is more intense, and I think I like this one better. I'll walk you through that later. I don't know if we'll get to that today, but I'm going to go all the way back now to the first illustration. Let's talk about how an artist such as myself, and I'm going to move you guys. I have a new I don't think I've used this yet with you all. I have a new holder for my Mevo camera, which lets you get a perfect straight down view of my table, which I'm kind of excited about. More of that coming, by the way. More good technological developments. All right, let's talk about how does one begin an illustration, in this case, for a book. Well, my client told me, excuse me, I have a cup of hot tea over here just to help aid my scratchy throat. My client gave me instructions. They were basically these. James Coker, as a young man, having just returned from the Civil War, by the way, with a shattered hip, and I forget which battle, but it was at Antietam, or, it was a very, very famous battle. He was severely wounded, not expected to live for a long time. As you can imagine, so many injuries in the Civil War resulted in fatality simply because of the germs, the infection that set in. But almost miraculously, he survived his injury. And I really do like this illustration. So here's the story. General Sherman, so he's fighting for the South, and there's all kinds of stuff in the book about, yes, he was a slave owner. No, we don't approve of slave ownership, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. All very appropriate repentance from white people, for our history. Repentance, not shame, I would add. If we get into shame mongering, we're all screwed. But repentance is appropriate. Apologies are appropriate. All right, I'll get off the preacher, get off my pulpit for a minute. I love this illustration because here's this man, General Sherman, has just come through his part of the country and through his farm, took all his chickens, all his cows, all his horses, all his seed corn, all his seed of every kind, all his food, took everything. All he's got left is one old horse that was too old for General Sherman to take, and two bags of a bag of cottonseed and a bag of seed corn that they didn't find, and a shattered hip. This man, by the way, so I don't need you to run ray heads. Here he is. Let's find. Here he is as a young man. There he is as an old man. Here he is as an old man. This man, he went on to be a successful businessman. Here he is at very old age, holding his grandchild probably. He eventually established the Sunoco, S-O-N-O-C-O, not the gas station Sunoco, but S-O-N-O-C-O in South Carolina. And I forget what Sunoco stands for, but he simply manufactured originally like the paper cones that things like I'll do a quick sketch of it. Things like this, that raw yarn was, maybe that's a little bit too steep. I think it's more like this. Okay, so he figured out a way to manufacture these paper cones, and he shipped them all over the country. Since then, his company has branched out into hundreds of things, and of course, in recent decades, bought other companies and so forth. So his company is now a multi-million-dollar company, as I understand it, a fairly major player in the economy of South Carolina, and this is where he started. Tell me that's not a good story. Oh my goodness. Okay, so where does an artist start? Well, I'll tell you where I start, and I'm already, you missed this part. So, number one, an illustration most of the time needs to read quickly. You can't put a whole lot of stuff. In fact, earlier I had a dead tree over here with some of the branches shown off. I played around with looking as if we're looking out through a barn door, dark, but I erased all that, decided it was just too much. So let me put that aside and start on another one. Love this tool, by the way. This is Creative Mark Artist Products. It's just a big fat lead holder. That's all it does. Holds this lead. I think I've got some more. Oh yeah, I've got some more in there. So it's not my last piece. Love it. love it. Never even thought of using such a thing until somebody gave me one for Christmas, and it's become a favorite tool. Okay, so how does one start developing illustrations? Step number one, get your doggone pen or pencil moving. Just start drawing. You are an illustrator. You are an artist. You are not a philosopher. I mean, you might be, as I am. But the point is, at the moment, I'm functioning as an artist, and it's my number one job just to get the dang pencil moving. And this is how I deal with, not writer's block, but artist block. The answer is you kick artist block in the shin and you just draw. Man, just keep the dang pencil moving. That's all you do. And I'm saying it really intensely because I feel like that's sort of the attitude we have to have. Just move it. The other thing is, of course, then you have to think like a storyteller. So am I contradicting myself? I don't think so. Hey, Paula, glad you caught me live today. That's very good. I'm going to pop up my sound. See if my sound gets any better. It might be a little better. Okay. So number one, just get stuff moving. Number two, you have to think like a storyteller. And very quickly, you need to think anatomy, of course. And if you don't know anatomy, you're screwed. I'm sorry. I'm really blunt today, aren't I? It's been a rough morning. No, I'm kidding. Hey, today's my 65th birthday, by the way, so it's been a delightful morning. I just haven't gotten as much done as I would like, but heck, it's my birthday. My family birthdayed me with a nice, delightful breakfast. 65, man, 65. I start collecting, or not collecting. I start being eligible for Medicare right now. That's amazing. All you old people, you remember how that felt. All you young people, trust me, it comes so fast, and you go, what? I'm still a young guy. I'm very thankful that I feel like a young guy. So step number one, just keep your pen moving. Step number two, you have to think like a storyteller. So by the way, I Googled sack of seed, old sack of corn, seed corn, and evidently they do come in just these sacks, just as I thought. So I'm not off there. I also did a quick search. Let me show you. Hey Jan, thank you very much. I am going to have a great day. I'm going to have a great year. This is going to be my best year yet, eclipsed only by my next year. I'm so blessed that I get to have a career in which I am still so much on the upswing of my career. Man, us artists are so blessed. So anyway, I did a search for old horse, by which the main thing I think of is swayback. So this is a swayback horse. There's another same one, turned the other way. And then I found an illustration. I thought, ooh, that's a good idea, because this artist actually, I'm not an expert on horses, but this back leg, like that, I also made 2 copies of this. This back leg, done at that angle, is jogged a memory for me. It's like, oh, that's right. Hello, Zamorite Art. Thank you very much. And the thing I really got from this illustration is, oh yeah, like an overgrown mane hanging down in his eyes. Right? It gives the idea. So I want to try to convey old horse, man with shattered hip, and 2 bags of seed. Okay, so maybe I'll put a few seeds down here to, show that that's what's in the bags, as if they've fallen out. In fact, that's an idea. Put a string, of like binder twine around the mouth of the bag. And I don't know from the story how large the sack of seed was. Okay, so there's one illustration. Now, some of you have seen this trick before. Let me back up just a little bit so you can say, I'm working on a light table, right? One of my favorite tools in the whole world, so that I can do this trick. Just turn the page over, and if I like this illustration, Now, one of the things I do like about this particular one that wasn't so great about this one, let me show you. Here's the first one I did. Thank you, Michaela. Appreciate that. This one has, what's his name? Coker. James Coker. Yeah. No, Charles James. Yep. Looking straight at us, right? That's like predictable. Does that make sense? It's like, that's what you would expect an illustrator to do, would be to have the person head pointed at us, which means that might not be the best way. So one good thing, I'm not sure that I'm going to go with this alternate, but one thing about that this view does have going for it is that we're looking at him at his face at an angle. Now, why is that better? Simply because it's a little less predictable. It's a little less cliche. Little bit more interesting, perhaps. I'm changing his hat. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and work on this this particular version a little bit. I have, by the way, in the past, I have looked up old crutches, and the fact is that the crutches of 100, 150 years ago aren't really that much different from the kind of crutches that we use today. Here's a change. I had this guy in a shirt and jeans. He really ought to be in bib overalls, don't you think? I mean, that's the ubiquitous outfit, uniform of a 19th century farmer, I would think, would be bib overalls. Now, I can't remember, forgive me, I can't remember which hip was shattered. I think it was his left, but of course, see, that's one way, not the other. The other question is, how does a man with a bad hip stand? So, here, I'm going to move you guys again just for a second. Earthquake ride, bear with me. All right, you can see me now, right? Yeah. So this is pretty typical of me. I want to act out. If it's my left hip that is shattered, then I don't have a crutch here. I should have thought about that. I have a yardstick, not long enough. And by the question is, does the man, if he's got one crutch, does he hold it in his left side or right side? By the way, I do know the answer to this is either way. There's not, people do, and I've had to use crutches at times. And the last time I used it was my right knee that was bad. So did I do my crutch on the right or the left? The answer is yes, both. But how does a man stand whose hip is crushed? Is he's probably got his weight on his good leg, right? Okay, and his bad leg, do I show it kind of gimpy? Of course, probably. So does it go like this? Okay, so what I'm thinking about, basic anatomy. This knee is locked. I don't think I've got him. I don't think I want him like this. I think I want it locked. This hip is high. This hip is low. You see, my hip is at an angle like that. And if that's the case, then typically my shoulders are the opposite of my hip. In other words, hips go this way, then shoulders typically go this way, unless I've got a crutch under this arm. Okay, so this is one way to hold a crutch, right? So locked, hip high, shoulder high. That looks natural. I've seen people like that. But this is also natural. Let's see which way I want. See, this is taking all the weight off my shattered left hip. This shoulder's high, this hip is high. And I'm trying to decide which looks more natural. Now, frankly, and I think you can see me, can't you? Yeah. By the way, I don't normally have a bed in my studio. That's a long story. We have a house guest with us for the last 6 months. I think this is the kind of stuff that non-artists don't realize that artists go through, at least good artists, if I can say that, okay? You have to think about this stuff. So which do I like better? Do I like this? Here's a thought. How about if he's scratching his head like doggone, or something slightly stronger than that? Right, Sherman, the dust of Sherman's army is just still settling over the next hill. He probably doesn't say doggone. He probably says something stronger, but this was a very religious man. So let's just say he just says doggone. What am I going to do now? That would be good. Don't you think? Kind of scratching his head and looking at 2 bags of seed, and there's an old horse behind him. Yeah, I think I like this. So I don't need to take a picture of this, although that would actually help a little bit, but I'll just use. So shoulder high, hip high, and head up. Now, does it work the other way? Which way looks like more forlorn? And his head down a little bit because he's looking at the seed. I don't know. I'm gonna try both of those. Okay, that was profitable. That got me. Earthquake again. Bear with me just for a minute while I move you guys. All right. That was profitable. So instead of arm down here on his hip, which is just kind of a, I don't know, kind of a disgusted look. Let's put this arm up on his head. And of course, you see the way I'm holding the pencil. I recommend that if you take a drawing class. I talk about that all the time. I still get kickback from people saying, no, you can hold your pencil any way you want. And I had a professor who was a fantastic drawer, and he held his pencil the ordinary way. Well, there's exceptions to every rule. But I'll try to resist the temptation to get arrogant sounding again. David Mercer will call me on it if I do. Hi, David. Hope you're listening. Yeah, hold your pencil, side saddle. Okay, so this way then it's his hip. His hips go this way and his shoulders go the same way, according to this drawing, which can make sense. Then his So I wonder, yeah, his leg would be bent back like that, I would say. Now I've moved the bags of seed over here. I like the idea of having one tied with a little bit of twine. Another thing that I do like from this first sketch is that I have it backlit, so the light behind him and see the shadow come. I kind of like that. I don't know if I'm going to stay with that or not, but I do sort of like that. Again, partly because it's just a little bit unexpected, a little unconventional. And then maybe his old horse not quite paying attention. You know, old horses don't pay attention. They're just there. But a overgrown mane, overgrown in his eyes, it gives the impression that he's old. And a lead just hanging straight down from his muzzle. At this angle, we can't see his sway back quite so much. I'm going to have him slightly bow-legged. I'm not an expert at old horses. I was a little bit surprised. I found a lot of articles about old horses, but they were all for like horse owners, how to take care of your old horse, you know. Then I didn't find very many pictures. Nah, that doesn't work. By the way, I'm in both of these, I'm assuming a very low angle because I want these bags of seed way up high. That's enough. So again, so here's what I would do then. I go back to the first side of this page and erase my first sketch. And if I like this sketch well enough, then I'll draw it again from this side. Again, I'll say I already see mistakes. you guys are really nice for not yelling at me. Hey, that arm's too short. So there we go. I have ways of fixing things. I don't always get things right the first time. So I'm thinking here of his head is, his hat is pushed back as he's scratching his head, but his face is basically looking down. I mean, would his leg go like this? It could go. I guess I am doing this one more time after all, aren't I? There's one major thing about this illustration that I want to change, and that is the position of the horse. Don't like the way the horse looks. I like the bags of seed over here. Now understand that my client hasn't seen any of this yet, so I don't dare take any of this too terribly far, spend too much time, because he could come back and say, no, I don't, he might really have something else in mind. So this is just a preliminary sketch. I'm going to spend a little bit more time getting something that I like. Now, each client is different. I don't like this horse at all, and it's getting in my way, so let me erase that. Every person is different. Generally speaking, if people are not artistic, and most people are not artistic, generally speaking, non-artistic people can't really discern sketches very well. They don't understand how real artists work. Again, most people's art career ended in 3rd grade. That's literal. That's literal. And the reason is because in 3rd grade, in America anyway, at about age 8 is when a child's linguistic communication skills eclipse their artistic skills. So at that point, they abandon drawing and take up reading, writing, and arithmetic, so to speak. And so most people, when they think about art or being an artist, they go back to 3rd grade and they remember little Billy or little Susie in the aisle next to them. And what an artist is in 3rd grade, an artist is the kid who can draw anything on command. Hey, Billy, can you draw an elephant? Sure. And he scribbles this, hey, Billy, can you draw a race car? Sure. Hey, Deborah, can you draw a unicorn? Sure. Et cetera, et cetera. So that's how, I'm telling you the truth. That's how most people think art still works. They think that I just whip off the top of my head whatever their subject matter. Anyway, I can go on and on and on. So I've drawn the horse, but he's in completely the wrong place. So here's what we do then. We're drawing him again. I'm going to trace him real quickly. It's not a great drawing, but I can do a little bit faster the second time than I did the first time. And his head shouldn't be up, should it? An old horse has his head hanging down. Whoops, big mistake. Okay, but let me finish this and I'll make that change in a minute. So I'm tracing the horse on a separate piece of paper so that I can then erase this. I have used a light table extensively since my first illustration job. That is, I had a job as an illustrator frankly at age 18, I got in the habit of using a light table, and it's a good habit to get in. Honestly, it's a good way to work. You can work fast, as you can see me doing here, and develop your illustrations quite quickly. Okay, which was the latest? This is like this. One time, I don't remember it happening one time. Maybe it happened more than where I actually erased the wrong drawing. That was irritating. Okay, so I'm going to move this horse's head, but here's an advantage. I can play around with the horse being back here. If I did this, then all of his earthly belongings would be all right here. No, I think I like the idea of the horse kind of walking up behind him, the way the way a horse would, almost sharing in his woes. Okay? And it's a low angle, so there's not much difference between the placement of the feet and the feet. That is, we're looking up at the man, but I want to change the angle of the horse's head, so. Poor old sway back horse. Long tail, tail all the way to the ground. Now, head down though, not head up. Not all the way down, but part way down. And of course, if I need to, I will, looks like I do at the moment. Looks like I need to at the moment. I'm not getting a good indication of this head coming toward us. And then the reins just hanging straight down on the ground. This horse is not going to run anywhere. This has been a long time since this horse ran. All right. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm just about to the point that I could actually take a quick picture of this, which these days I actually do with my phone. I just take a picture, edit it a little bit in my camera. Oh, pardon me. no lead in that pencil. Okay, I had much better technical pencils. All right. I'm wondering now, light from the left or light from the right? Light from straight behind. Straight behind is not as dramatic as slightly from the left or right. So let me think about that. I could have all the shadows going this way or this way. I think I still like the idea of his face being mostly in shade, right? That's kind of symbolic. It's a dark time. It's a dark moment. And it could be darker, at least he has one bag of corn, one bag of cotton, and an old horse. What a great story, huh? I mean, it doesn't matter, what side of the war you're on. The human condition is universal. We've all been here, haven't we? If it weren't for bad luck I'd have no luck at all. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. Thank you. Hee-haw. That was a blast from the past. Only you old timers. What are you talking about? Hee-haw. Yeah, and then old horse. So I think that this is probably enough time. I would love to keep this broadcast going and switch to some of these other illustrations so you can see me do something else. Since I did call this developing illustrations, and all you've seen me do so far is develop one illustration. Of course, and again, I will work on the anatomy of that horse. Shadow going this way is the way we ended up. Yeah, and he's looking at these two sacks of seed. Now, if I want, I have here a blending stub, a tortillion. I'm always mildly irritated by words that have that have a double L in them, especially if it's followed by I-O-N, because I'm thinking that should be pronounced tortillo, right? If it's Latino or Romantic French or Romance language, it should be tortillo. But anyway, That's what this is, a blending stick, or tortillion, or tortillo. Now, I'm going to do one more thing, I think, to this, just to make sure that my client can see what's going on. I'm over here looking for a Sharpie marker or a, there we go, got one. Just want to make sure that after that blending that he can see the face. Oh, come on, it helps if the Sharpie marker is one of those that works. Okay, so eyebrows slightly raised, but eyes definitely, eyelids down. His wife, if I remember the story right, I read the whole thing, but his wife basically nursed him back to health. In fact, she did some really heroic stuff. She chased her husband down, found him in, I don't remember, prison camp, or I think it was in a prisoner of war, which, by the way, years ago, I read the story, Jonesville Diaries, or something like that. It was a story of a southern prisoner of war camp during the Civil War, and it was positively hair-raising. Absolutely horrible conditions, and so many men died when the South surrendered to the North. Lincoln took the right position and said, how do we destroy our enemies? The answer is by turning them into friends. Much like the Marshall Plan of after World War II. Not everybody agreed with him, of course, but in hindsight, it was the right thing. But they did hang the man in charge, the Union, the rebel soldier officer in charge of Johnsonville, Jones, I forget what it's called. Anyway, this woman's wife went and found him. He was desperately ill, deeply, horribly wounded, not expected to live, and somehow brought him back from the brink. That's pretty amazing. A lot of inspiring characters. I love history. I love biography. You know what? Anytime you think you've got it bad, come on. Just that's one thing I like about historians. Well, real historians, not the kind that are affected and infected by a bunch of Marxist revisionism, but real historians who still care about what really happened. Know that we live in the best of times. If you don't know we live in the best of times, you're not a historian, are you? All right, I'm starting to preach again, so I'll stop there. We live in the best of times, folks. We live, absolutely. With all the injustices that are happening in our country and all over the world, it's still less unjust than all the other periods of history in all the other countries in the world. All right. So that's what I'm going to take a picture of, and I'm going to send to my client. Now, having done that, what should I do next? These are all, get rid of these for now. This one also, my client felt like this guy was too chubby. So anyway, here he is with James Coker with a shattered hip hoeing. He learned how to hoe. And my guess is, I'm, again, doing what you saw me do just a few minutes ago, standing up and acting this out. I think you have to cut the end of the hoe handle off. Otherwise, it just doesn't, maybe not this short, but you can't use a full length because it just doesn't work. But I'll develop that later. Let's go to this. I want to show you a little bit about this technique. And I'm wondering now if I should do a separate broadcast. Hang on, bear with me. No, I'll just keep going. So I know people, you're going to leave whenever you're tired of this. So I did this illustration, I think, on some nice kind of board, and I don't even know what it is. But I went and found some fresh, thin, like 2-ply, I think it is. That is pretty thin. Now I'm drawing a blank. What kind of board is it? That's silly. Yeah, my language side of my brain, it takes a backseat when I'm doing artwork. Bristol board, duh. And of course, my light table won't work here because the first board is too thick. So I made a copy of it, printed it out on my printer, slightly smaller, and that's okay. So now I believe, yep, I can see this. It's a little bit crowded on this. You know, this piece of paper is not any too large for this illustration. But I think I can make it work anyway. So I'm going to use now some removable Scotch tape. I used, as an illustrator over the decades, I've used tons of this stuff. If you're not familiar with it, so it's not as sticky, it can be taken off. So really good for holding stuff down like this temporarily. Now the other thing I'm going to do, I'm looking now to see if I have some narrow masking tape. And I do. Bear with me for just a minute. Let me step across my studio. One of these kits, my watercolor kit, I believe. There we go. Yep. And I'm going to take my sweater off. This is the first medium warm day we've had in a week, so that's kind of nice. I'm going to mask this piece of paper. I think this is just a Dan Nelsonism. You don't have to do this. I find, and now of course I've double taped, right? So I got tape on top of tape there. But I find that I just like, when I'm finished an illustration, I really like nice clean edges. That's just me. That's just me being kind of weird. Me being kind of obsessive compulsive. I do recommend you think about such things, but you don't have to come to the same conclusion as myself. Okay, if I do this, I'm going to lose some clouds up here, so that's too bad. I'm going to crop it. Same thing down here. I'm going to move this line. So forgive me while I mumble to myself while I get this all set up. All right. So I will not show you me doing this entire process, but I will describe it to you. This is going to be done in Chris or CF Payne. That's the name. I'm telling you somebody's name. It's the name of one of the most famous illustrators in America in the last 25 years. And I actually knew Chris in the Dallas Society of Illustrators in the mid-'80s, before he went off and became uber famous. And I have done several videos of me imitating his technique. If you want to go to my YouTube channel and find me doing demonstrations of how to do an illustration in the style of CF Payne. Okay, here's what I'm looking at right now. So step number 1, colored pencils. turn my lights back on so I can see the color a little bit better. I'm looking for either black or dark brown. And most of these are barrel Prismacolor. Looks like I might be running a little bit shy on the black. That's unusual. A cheap knockoff there, Spectre color. There we go. All right. So what I'm going to do here now is the real artwork. This is not a sketch anymore. This is the real deal. And I mentioned earlier that we're changing now from a adult/juvenile book to adult only. So the biggest difference between those two is how the lines are treated. And the biggest difference, so how are the lines treated differently? The answer is the lines here are a little bit more sophisticated or mature or scribbly. What does sophisticated or mature mean? Scribbly. The figures also, I'm going to make them slightly older. We're not trying to appeal to children anymore. If you want to appeal to, by the way, to, let's say an 11-year-old, if you're doing illustrations, a book of some kind, or anything at all, if you want to appeal to an 11-year-old, then the characters in your illustration should be about 12, 13, and 14 years old. An 11-year-old does not want to see drawings of an 8-year-old. Does it make sense? Now, he might endure if you can tickle his cute bone, he might, or funny. He would enjoy laughing at a 6-year-old, but he doesn't think 6-year-olds are cool. But an 11-year-old does think that 14-year-olds are cool. Now, an adult, of course, is somewhat immune to those. I'm going to adjust this hand, I think. I think it should be a little bit higher. So I'm drawing on the back now. So look at that. Yeah, I think that's a little better. So now I have two hands here, but I'm going to take the one that I just modified. Words, let me use some different words besides messy. I said my lines can be messier if I'm appealing to adults, not just to children. Another way to put that would be, I said more sophisticated, more iterative. It can be breaks in the lines, lost lines, insinuated lines. An adult brain is quicker to fill in some of those blanks than a child mind. By the way, as you can probably tell, I have quite a few opinions about children's books illustrations, and in fact I disagree probably with most like librarian type people who would be in positions of influence to publishers. I probably disagree with publishers about children's illustrations. I'll give you here in a word. Most publishers evidently seem to think that children want to see juvenile illustrations. That is, they want to see real bright colors, simple lines, clean lines. So that's part of the reason why on this illustration I yielded to that temptation and I made my lines cleaner. Now, there's a reason I have these opinions. One is I had children of my own 30 some years ago, and the other reason is because I have grandchildren of my own now. And I think I'm getting way too deep here, but I think what publishers and, so to speak, experts, I don't know if they are experts, but what experts think children like and what children actually like are two different things. Here's my, and I'd experimented on my own children quite a bit. They're all in counseling today, of course. I mean, as recipients of counseling, because I wanted to see, how they responded. So when my children were young, like 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, but starting very young, 2, 3, we wouldn't just read a book. It was my job, more than half the time it was my job to read the bedtime story. We wouldn't just read the book. I would ask my children at age 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 to critique the illustrations. And I would try to get them to speak very honestly about how they liked. Because that doesn't prove that. No, I've got a lot more evidence than just that. That's not the only evidence, but that is part of it. And I found to a surprising degree that my children liked good illustrations, good quality, no matter what style. If the quality, if my artist's eyebrows went up and said, "Whoa, this person's good," no matter what style. I'm not talking about hyperrealism necessarily, anything like that. No. Just if they were a good illustrator. Bill Peet, P-E-T-E, Bill Peet, Randy's Dandelions. Brilliant. Well, and it wasn't a big surprise that my kids' favorite children's illustrator became again, my brain's in the drawing mode, so I'm losing. Chris Van Allsburg. You all know Chris Van Allsburg, whether you know him or not. He is the children's book illustrator. Look him up. He's a freak of nature, absolutely genius. He did the illustration, the book from which, the Polar Express is based on his book, and Jumanji. Both of those have been made into feature-length movies. And brilliant. All of his stuff is brilliant. He used to teach at Rhode Island School of Design. He's from my hometown, Grand Rapids, Michigan. Anyway, for what it's worth, my opinion is that children really do respond to excellent illustrations, regardless of the style. That's sort of my bottom line. And many children's book publishers think that that's not true. They think that the children want illustrations that are real juvenile and simple, clean lines and clean colors. Anyway, I'm not going to chase that down any further. I've beaten that horse to death enough. Speaking of dead horses, right? First I was drawing one, now I'm beating one. But I invite you. Maurice Sendak. Absolutely scandalized, I should say absolutely, but largely scandalized the publishing world 30-some years ago when he came out with his Things That Go Bump in the Night or Thump in the Night, something like that. All the Maurice Sendak books. Speaking of which, Shel Silverstein, Where the Sidewalk Ends. Likewise, children's book that rattled the children's publishing industry because they had illustrations that children weren't supposed to like. Maurice Sendak especially. Scary, creepy, funny, good illustrations. So now these boys are, the change my client wanted is he wanted them walking across a furrowed field. So I'm going to make that a furrowed field. Okay, so let me describe for you how this illustration is going to proceed. As you see, I'm doing a drawing with a black Prismacolor colored pencil. I could use dark brown, black is fine. The next thing I'm going to do, I'm trying to remember if I do a little bit of shading with pencil. I think I can if I want to, a little bit of shading with the pencil. Next thing I'm going to do is flat areas of color on top of this with acrylics, with a lot of acrylic gesso in it, so that the acrylics has a bit of a tooth, right? Acrylic paints by themselves are quite glossy. Are you with me? But acrylic gesso has a scratch to it, has a tooth to it. Okay? So I'm going to do, this is Chris Payne, CF Payne's style of illustration. So we have two Chris's here today. It's Chris Van Allsburg and C.F. Payne, two famous children's illustrators with the name Chris. This is C.F. Payne, his technique. And so after I do broad areas of color with acrylics with gesso in it, sort of flat color, blue, local color, blue, green, brown, you know, and so forth. Next, watercolor wash, brown over the whole thing, brown wash over the entire illustration. Then I lift out with a Q-tip or with a damp brush or a tissue, lift out the brown watercolor, leaving whatever brown I want, but lifting out. Then I spray it all. Here's the hard part. I'm going to spray it with a very, very rough workable fixative. And this is the hard part. The fixative that Chris used many years ago and that I use is no longer available on the market. It's called lacquer mat. It's very, very rough. I don't know that anybody, I need to find out, because I still have 1 or 2 cans left. So that gives it a tooth. It also creates this misty, pale look that you can see partly in this illustration. Does that make sense? So that, and it has a tooth. Now, if I continue with the CF Payne technique, then on top of that, I do oil and colored pencil. But on these, I didn't do that. On top of this, so I departed from CF Payne at this point, and I finished the illustration with pastel pencils. I don't know which way I'm going to go today. Remains to be seen which way I'm going. Okay, I'm going to do a little bit of shading. And unlike my normal light effects or shading techniques, and this is not going to be evening with a strong light left or right. This is going to be light mostly straight down. I want to convey the feeling that these boys are out in the hot sun, working pretty hard. And it is the slave boy and the slave owner's son. So, you know, it has all kinds of historical ramifications. They were best of friends, is the story. The rest of the story is, when emancipation came, the slave boy ran away from his owner. Well, I mean, his owner no longer owned him, of course, but he ran away. And I can't remember where he went. But late in life, the poor black man at this point was down on his luck. Sad story. And he came back to James Coker. And James Coker cared for him the rest of his life. I am not by any means, you know, why did he have a hard time? Well, it's not hard to imagine why an ex-slave might have a hard life, right? Someday we might talk about race. I have strong opinions on the subject. Maybe not today, though. All right, I think that's enough shading. I'll do a little bit of texture in here in the trees. I would think it's obvious that this is a stylized version of illustration. Well, I mean, I guess every illustration is stylized, but I'm not aiming at hyperrealism. I think that's pretty obvious, but I'm aiming at a fair degree of realism, not cartoony. Definitely don't want cartoony. I see a lot of chats here from you guys. I appreciate that. All right, I guess I'll keep going. Hey, as I said, if you're tired of watching me, you've long since left. Let's do some fun stuff. So I have here my very high-tech paper plate for mixing color on, and I have here a spray bottle. Well, let's break out a new paper plate. This big time. First thing I'm going to grab over here is a bucket of gesso, and ooh. I could use a palette knife. Yeah, just put a generous dollop of gesso on my plate. That should do it. Let's get this thing out of here before it falls down for real. And some blue. What color is that? Fake cobalt, okay. And some yellow. There's a pattern here. Can you see where this is going? Let's put out some blue and some yellow. And what next? Red, of course. And then if I want this magenta, good. And just for laziness sake, let's put out some green. I don't have to put out green, right? I can get it with, yeah, it's just a shortcut. I guess that'll do. Wait, no, I have a brown here. Again, same thing. I don't need to put brown out, but it's just a, oh, that's no good. Throw that out. Yellow ochre. Let's see if this is any good. Again, I don't need to put this out. It's just a shortcut. I'm not here to show off or do anything like that. I'm just here to get the job done. Oh, and there's also a little tube of cheap purple, what do they call it? Prism violet. Cheap student grade stuff. All right, there we go. And I bought some really cheap brushes just the other day because they were such a good bargain, you know, a deal I can't refuse. So here's a bunch of cheap brushes. And I have this old illustration to go by. That's a little bit of a help. And here we go. So this is quite simple. This is roses are red, violets are blue kind of painting. Nothing terribly sophisticated or artistic about that. Just paint some sky blue, give it some variety. But fairly flat colors here is the order of the day. Not sophisticated, not really much modeling at all, not shading, just flat color. Again, the technique that I'm using here is a semi-steel, depending how close I stick to it. It's a steel from CF Payne, P-A-Y-N-E. And if you're an artist, or especially if you're an illustrator, you need to familiarize yourself with his work. Chris, for several years after I knew him in Dallas, he moved up to Cincinnati. He still lives there as far as I know. For several years, he did the back of all the Reader's Digest magazines. His work's also been on the front of Time magazine several times, and so on and so on and so forth. Like I said, he's a real big dog, and a nice guy as far as I can tell. Teaches at a school of illustration, I think, in Cincinnati, and very distinctive, very unusual style, very, very distinctive style. I mean, once you've seen a CF Payne illustration, you go, ha ha, I recognize that guy. And last year or the year before, I can't remember which, I did spent quite a bit of time actually learning and developing his technique, partly because he had not done a very good job of teaching it to others. Sorry about that, Chris. You're a great artist. Teaching, meh. I did order some of his stuff too. So that is to say, I paid for some of his instruction. Enjoyed it very much. He doesn't open up very readily about his technique. He describes it, but not in great detail. That's my observation. So if you want to learn his technique, go to my YouTube instead of his. Okay, so once again, I'm using acrylic gesso mixed with color, and I have learned that I want every bit of the illustration board, which is Bristol board, thin 1-ply Bristol board. I want every bit of it to have this paint on it. I don't want any Bristol board in its virgin condition. Okay, learned that the hard way in my experiments a couple years ago. So one of the tricks that Chris is using, again, his technique, one of the tricks that he's using is, in fact, the transparency of acrylic, especially after it dries. Acrylics go fairly transparent, right? That's one of the irritating things about using acrylics. If you're not familiar with them, as they dry, they transparentize. They become more transparent. And if you're not expecting that, that can be really irritating. And the reason that matters, or the way that shows up in this illustration, is if you notice, I'm going right over the pencil lines. Why? Because I know that the pencil lines are still going to show somewhat less, of course. They're being pushed back, but they're still going to show after this acrylic dries. So it's brilliant technique that Chris invented. One of the questions I would like to ask him, and if you get the chance before I do, did he make this up or did he learn it from somebody else? Now, I've never seen anybody that does something like him, so I suspect he made it up, but I don't know to what extent. You know, he probably got some of it. This is the way art works. He got some of it from somebody else, but then developed it into his own technique. And again, what is happening here is I'm covering up. I'm not trying to. That speeds up the process considerably, because if I had to go around all of his lines. Somebody just asked me, who is it? Oh, hey, David. No, I do not get a pension. If I had spent my life working at a factory or working in some kind of union job, then yes, I might qualify. Now, here in the States, I could start collecting Social Security. That may be what you're asking. I could start collecting Social Security at age 65, but I'm in good health, hallelujah. So I'd be crazy to do that, because the later you wait to start collecting Social Security, the higher your monthly payments will be. So the idea here is, as you probably know in the States, is that we've been paying into Social Security all of our adult lives, well, all of our lives, period, adult or otherwise. And at age 65 or so, we get to begin collecting back what we put in. There's always, always, always great debate as to how much, will the Social Security system still be in operation? Like when my adult children are 65. I am not an expert. I don't know the answer to that question at all. But anyway, I certainly am not going to. I mean, again, I'm very thankful to be in good health. I will delay if my good health continues, I'll delay to the very last option, the very last choice, which I think is 75 or something like that, to begin collecting any Social Security. Again, those of us who are artists, we are so blessed. I don't think there's an industry, if I can use that word. I don't think there's a job on the planet that is so friendly to aging as that of being an artist. As long as you keep your eyes and keep your brain and keep your hands, you can keep going. There are many, many artists that have worked well into old age. One of my favorites is Maxfield Parrish. I know he died at 95. I think he did his last painting at age 95. I may be wrong about that, maybe 94, 93. But either way, that's pretty darn impressive, right? An athlete, professional athlete, is done. I mean, very few go past 40, right? And those of us older in years, 40 is like you're still a kid at 40, just about. You still look good. You don't know that you look good, but you do. So being an artist is good. By the way, every once in a while I get asked. In fact, I had a little dialogue on Facebook this morning with one of my regular viewers who has some health struggles, and every once in a while I run into an artist whose health is not good. In particular, Parkinson's or something like that causes tremors. And man, I really always want to get a hold of artists before they throw in the towel, before they quit, because many times they say, well, I can't paint anymore because my hand shakes. Please understand that most 99% of artists have a problem. They think they want to get loose, but they're too tight. well, if your hands start shaking, you're going to paint loose. And I'm convinced that, I mentioned just the other day, Charles Schulz continued doing the Peanuts cartoon way past the time that his hands started shaking. Good for him. And you can tell, you can see the shake in his drawings. But they almost, not almost, they give the drawing, his cartoons, Peanuts cartoon, for those of you who don't know what I'm talking about, Charlie Brown and Snoopy and gang. His shaking hand gave his later cartoons a sophistication and a charm that his earlier cartoons didn't even possess, good as he was early on. So I always want to grab a hold of artists before they throw in the towel, before they quit and say, I can't paint because my hand shakes. No, 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 no. You're probably just coming into your forte. Now, I know, forgive me, I'm being, what's the word, insensitive almost, because I do understand that at some point, someone would say with Parkinson's may not be able to paint at all. But I'm in the early stages, paint with that shaking hand, man. Just paint. Paint, paint, paint. You're probably going to paint better. You just won't have the control you used to have, but doggone it, control is what got in your way all those years where you were young and your hands did what you told them. All right. I'm getting in a danger zone here of being insensitive to people with serious issues, but so I'm going to let it go at that. But consider what I'm saying. Do think about it seriously. As a serious artist, I tell you that most people should continue to paint or draw through their shakiness. Rembrandt did it. I can't prove that his hands were shaky, but his eyes were bad. It was obvious. His later, and the same is true for many, many, many great artists. As they aged, their paintings got looser and better. There's almost no art historian that doesn't think that the later paintings of these great masters were better. Now, Maxfield Parrish, on the other hand, his final painting was not shaky. It was still tight and good. Again, just you can Google, you can look up Maxfield Parrish, spelled 2 R's, P-A-R-R-I-S-H. For many years when I was an illustrator, he was my muse. He was my inspiration. He was the one that I copied more than anybody else. So that I felt I have a great sense of affinity with the artwork of Maxfield Parrish. All right, changing brushes here. Let's get away from the flat. Go to round. So once again, what I'm using here is acrylic with gesso mixed in. Trying to make sure I get enough gesso because the gesso has a tooth to it that the acrylics alone don't have, and we want that tooth. Now see on this face, for instance, I don't have to be careful not to cover up the lines. No, just plaster it right down, cover it right up. Let me zoom in so you can see a little bit better what I'm doing here. Same thing on the hand, right? I don't have to try to go around all the line. No, just paint it right over it. That's part of the genius of this technique. It's fast. When you're an illustrator, you have to work fast. That's a big part of Chris Payne's story. You have to learn how to get the job done quickly. I wouldn't take anything for my years as an illustrator. I learned how to work hard, and most illustrators do, in fact. Learn how to pump this stuff out, because that's the name of the game. Now, you also learn how to cheat and trace and project and do all kinds of stuff, and that's fine. It's all legal, but it can cause your native skills to deteriorate if you're not careful. That's that's the downside of being an illustrator, is you're tracing and projecting all the time, and your skills of drawing do tend to deteriorate. So, but other than that, you certainly work hard and pump it out. I've told this story before, but I'll tell you again. It's so iconic in my story, in my development. I was visiting our town, our city. Raleigh has a art association, an artist group in the heart of downtown, like many of yours does. A big warehouse. It used to be a big empty warehouse, and the city took it over, and it has a number of artist studios working in it, and they have, you know, shows and sales and so on and so on and so forth, right? And I was visiting there one time, this is a long time ago, 20 years, maybe 30, and just enjoying myself, walking around, visiting the different studios and visiting the various artists who happened to be working that day. And I walked into one of the artists. He was doing a portrait, fairly large, I mean, you know, 4 by 5 foot canvas, something like that, maybe even 4 by 6, I'm not sure. And I think it was just a portrait of one person. I don't think it was a multi-person. That would make a difference in this story. No, it was just one person, I'm sure. And maybe a business, pretty formal portrait, you know, well done, well done. I was humming and hawing admiringly, appropriately, saying, wow, that's nice. And I don't know what possessed me. It was a pretty stupid thing to say. But I looked at it and said, huh, you've been working on this maybe for a week or so? You can kind of see where this is going, can't you? I was an illustrator, right? If looks could kill, I would be dead on the studio floor that day. He glared at me like, you idiot. And he was a little bit offended too, which I can understand. He said, I've been working on this for 6 months. Now, which I was embarrassed. I mean, I wanted the floor to open up and swallow me, right? I was embarrassed. But let me ask you a question. Which one of us should have been embarrassed? I thought he'd been working on it a week as an illustrator. It looked like about a week's worth of work. He said he'd been working on it for 6 months. Well, folks, that is part of what's wrong, in my opinion, with the fine arts culture and the fine arts world. Many artists just don't quite ever get this hard-ass working thing down. You got to work. You got to work hard. I don't apologize for that. So, I have a question that it's for myself. It's a question about myself. I've been asked myself this morning. So, most of my career these days, as you may know, is doing oil paintings. In fact, big oil paintings, right? And maybe I've turned a corner. I don't know. Remains to be seen. But I started a big painting last night. You can see that. Daily Art of Inch number 545, I think it was. I started a painting that is 7.5 feet tall and about 44 inches wide. I would like that to be my full-time job. But here I am today. I've got responsibilities. This is not my only one. I was working on another small job before I started this broadcast today. So the question is, are these a pain in the neck? Is this kind of work, is it a hindrance to my career? Should I stop doing this kind of nonsense? You know, am I just doing it for the money? Well, if I am, then I should give serious consideration to refusing, to closing this chapter in my art life. Don't you think? If I'm just doing it for the money, this is not where my future lies, I don't think. So should I just quit doing this stuff? And that's a very real possibility. Maybe I should. But I like to imagine my career. This is what I was thinking before I started my broadcast. If money were no object and I could do any kind of artwork I wanted to, and I didn't have to do it for money, I could just do what I wanted, would I want to continue to do this kind of stuff And you know what? The answer is yes. I might be wrong. That might be stupid. I might be really foolish for feeling that way. But in fact, that is the way I feel. And I don't think it is foolish. Here's why. I think every time I sit down and exercise a different side of my brain, so to speak, it affects my whole artistic mind. My whole artistic skill is affected and colored by doing this odd stuff. Does that make sense? So, and again, I might be wrong. I might be an idiot. Maybe I should really stop this. Maybe I shouldn't be wasting my time. The other thing, and I'm quite sure about this, is that doing this kind of stuff is such a fun distraction, such a fun break for me. It lets me do some art and yet take a break. Like, frankly, most of the time when I'm painting, I'm standing up, I'm working hard, I'm working energetically, I'm working vigorously, right? As you see, if you saw me paint any big painting. And doggone, is it nice just to kind of just to sit down and make some money sitting on my butt. So it's a nice distraction. I enjoy it. There you go. Again, I might be wrong. I might be an idiot for thinking that way. Maybe I should be a better businessman and say, no, cut out that nonsense. But anyway, I'm sure I don't think that's hard for any artist to understand. To get paid to do something like this is not bad. Kind of fun. But the main thing is I do feel like it lets me develop auxiliary artistic skills that influence my area of focus. Okay, I'm nearly finished here, as you can see, doing fairly flat areas of color. Real simple, not a lot of shading, covering up the lines that are there. I don't have to be careful. And again, for those of you who just joined me, perhaps this, the technique developed by Chris or C.F. Payne, P-A-Y-N-E, very famous illustrator. I've studied him quite a bit to find everything I could find online, including paying for some of his programs that he offered. The next step in this operation, this will be dry pretty quickly. First of all, I want to make sure that there are no little bits of Bristol board uncovered. I don't want there to be accidentally something showing. Little tiny slivers, no problem, but basically I don't want any big gaps, okay? And then I think I'll just keep going at that point. Might as well. And now I'm mixing up a very pale warm gray for James's dirty t-shirt. Yeah, so here's a finished illustration done in this technique. So that's kind of where we're going, although I'm modifying it just a little bit. And I'm not sure, with this one, I departed from C.F. Payne's technique, 80% through the process. Departed, did my own. And on this, I'm not sure if I'm going to do that again or if I'm going to stick with Chris's recommended. If I go with Chris's, let me give you the outline. Again, you can go to my YouTube channel and find me do it. There's a whole playlist of me doing the imitation of the copying Chris Payne's technique. But if here's the crisp paint: colored pencil, acrylic with gesso, watercolor, spray, oil paint, and then finally oil paint and colored pencil. Crazy, huh? Now I have wondered, and some other people wondered, well, how's the archival? Is he going to run into troubles with that crazy combination because he's doing oil on top of acrylic? No, did I say that right? Yes, he is doing oil on top of watercolor, but then he comes back and does other stuff on top of that. Is he going to run into trouble? The answer is we don't know. My intuition, having done several, is that the oil that he uses is so thin, and it's the bond that he's creating is quite solid. So I don't think his illustrations are going to fall apart in 100 years. Could be wrong about that, of course. If I am wrong, somebody please come and tell me. All right. I think I'm done with that. Man, I hate to waste all this. I should go put this in the freezer, but I don't have time for now, so I'll just spray it generously. Maybe go put it in the freezer later, because I'm going to do other illustrations in this technique. Now, I do know, I'm keenly aware of the fact that this broadcast is getting extremely long. Wisdom might say that I should cut it short. But frankly, the comments that I get from most of you guys most of the time is, no, just keep going. I'm loving it. So I know that's not everybody. It's only the two people that stay with me. But for you two people, I guess I'm going to keep going. Okay. So here we go. I've got my small-ish watercolor tray out. I'm going to, I have this trick. I'm on a double, my drawing table slants slightly, and then this light board slants more. But if I stick a Scotch tape dispenser under here, then it levels out. And I think I want it level for this part. Okay, first of all, everything here is dry. And in fact, you could probably hear this. Yeah, you hear that tooth? Yeah, that's what we want here. Now, I need a large brush. Doesn't matter really much. Kind of brush. Here we go. Sorry, let me get straight out here. Hey, Marcus, my friend. I'm sorry about the flu. I certainly understand that. I've still got a nagging cough. I don't think I'm contagious, but it's hanging on forever. Weeks and weeks. All right. So I'm mixing up just a neutral brown. That is like a Van Dyke brown, maybe. I don't know what these are. And a little bit of Payne's gray, so it's not too intense. Ready? Watch this. Isn't that crazy? So of course I'm doing watercolor on top of acrylic. Right? So the acrylic is impervious. Once it dries, it's not going anywhere. None of this watercolor is going to soak in, so to speak. There. Rinse out this brush. Give me just a second. I've got a couple palette knives that I used up here a minute ago that have been soaking in water. Not the handles. By the way, one of the worst things that student painters do to brushes, acrylic painters, is leave their brushes sitting in water. Don't do that. No. Do not do that ever. Wood stretches the ferrule. Wood stretch. Sorry for the noise. Sorry about that. I hate noises. Okay, done with the watercolor. That didn't take very long, did it? While I'm over here, let's say I'm going to grab some Q-tips, but I only have one over there. Let me see if I've got some over here. So the next, if I need to run down the hall to the bathroom, I will do that. And this is a good time, in my opinion, this is a good time to put on a glove. The purpose of the glove is not to protect my hand from the dangerous watercolor. I'm sorry, watercolor is not very dangerous, especially if there's no cobalt or cadmium in it, which there's not. Okay, this is to protect the paper, protect the surface from the oils, whatever oils might be on my hand. Okay, that's all dry. A little bit of wet beads around here. Next operation is to lift off watercolor. And I can use any tool I want. I'm going to start with a very blunt one. I'm going to start with tissue. Dip it, and I'm going to spray it. Okay? And start lifting stuff off. So here's where the fun starts. And it's also, at least for me, I'm sure Chris has done thousands of illustrations of this technique. There's probably no surprises, but for me, there's always, of course, always a little bit of surprise. It's like, oh, how's this going to look? That didn't work all that great, so put that down. Let's go back to something a little more conventional. By the way, I told you these brushes were real cheap. Be quiet. Can you hear that? The ferrule is loose. Brand new brush. So that's what's called a cheap brush, folks. Worth every darn penny I paid for it. And I'm, of course, wetting the painting. Let me switch to. I don't know. I'm here. I'm very indecisive at the moment. I can't decide whether to start with the big stuff or the little stuff. Now, if you take a minute and go dash over and look at Chris Payne's illustrations, you're going to begin to see the Chris Payne look just starting to happen on this illustration. His illustration has a very distinctive texture, kind of a speckly, I guess that's the best word for it, a speckled texture. Very pleasant, very fun. And this is part of where it comes from. Where does it come from? It comes from rubbing or painting watercolor over much, what was that? Here it is. It comes from rubbing watercolor on it and then lifting it off this slightly rough surface, right? The roughness then shows up visually as little speckles. It's visually rough. You can see the texture. And it's very fetching, in my opinion. This technique is brilliant. I wouldn't be copying it if I didn't think it was brilliant, of course. So can you see that right there? This texture? It's the interplay of the acrylic with gesso in it, and then watercolor on top. Now, if I may, here's a general principle that many of you would benefit from. It's this. I've taught this often. The shortest route between 2 points is a straight line, right? The shortest distance between 2 points is a straight line. So I'm making sort of an analogy of that. The shortest route from start to realism, from start to similitude, that is the quickest way. Whoops, my phone battery is about to die, so I hope we're not going to get noise here. The quickest way to get to achieve realism is by lifting paint off the canvas. Now, let me say that again. Some of you never heard such a thing. About time you heard it. The shortest route from start to realism is by lifting, by negative painting, by taking stuff off. Now, there's a name for this kind of painting and the look that is achieved. There's an Italian, old, Middle Ages Italian name for it. It's called sfumato. S-F, F as in Frank, S as in Sam, F as in Franks. Sfumato. And it's the look that is achieved basically when you lift paint off the canvas. It's soft edges. The word sfumato in Italian means smoke. So this is a reference to the smoky, soft edges of this that is achieved. Now, any art history book in the world, every art history book, when they talk about sfumato and they give you an example, I'll tell you exactly. They all use exactly the same one. Which painting in history? Oh, it's really obscure. Few of you have ever even seen this painting. Hang on. Only the few of you that are real art. I'm being silly. I'm being sarcastic. No. The chiefest, not cheap. The chiefest example of sfumato is the Mona Lisa. No, there you go. You want to see a sfumato painting? Look no further than the Mona Lisa, okay? But let me go back to my broad principle. The shortest route from start to realism is negative painting, reverse painting, lifting off. I'm using all these synonymous terms. Taking paint off the canvas. It's the easiest way to achieve a rounded appearance. Okay? And Chris Payne's technique, this will be impressive to you only if you go and look at his stuff. Chris's technique involves not one, but two complete, distinct, separate stages of lifting off. You see me doing one here, where I'm lifting off the watercolor. But if I continue with the CF Payne technique, you'll see that he does exactly the same thing with the oil layer. That is, he puts oil, just like I did with watercolor. I put brown watercolor over a whole thing, and now I'm lifting it off. Chris's technique includes doing exactly the same thing, but the next time with oil instead of watercolor. So that's part of the reason why Chris is able to achieve such stunning realism, even though his figures, his faces, most of his stuff is caricature-ish. Even though his drawings aren't realistic, the effect is very realistic, very believable, rounded objects and flesh tones in particular. So I just find that interesting, and some of you need to hear that. You didn't know you needed to hear that today, but you did. You need to hear that the quickest path from start to realism is lifting off. And you're in good company when you do it. Chris Payne and Leonardo da Vinci. You haven't heard of Chris Payne, but you have heard of Leonardo. And if you live in America or North America in the last 25 years, you've seen Chris Payne's work probably several times. You just didn't know who it was. And if you're an artist, you probably looked at his stuff and thought, either subconsciously or consciously, dang, that is good stuff. But that is exactly correct. It's good stuff. Now I'm just experimenting using all different tools for lifting off. And again, a non-artist might say, well, if you're just going to lift it off, why did you put it on in the first place? Well, it's pretty obvious in this case, isn't it? Because am I lifting it all off? Oh, by no means. No, 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 no. And I am trying to think, by the way, that the sun's coming from this side, so there's more dark on this side of the cloud than this side. Coming back here and lifting more off the sunny side of the cloud. Now, again, remember, I have 3 whole stages, 3 layers to go on this illustration. I'm not done, of course, when this is over. And again, I have yet to decide whether I'm going to stay true to the CF paint technique or whether I'm going to do what I did here. And I abandoned them after stage 3 or 4, and then went with pastel, or pastel pencil to be precise, and then whiteout on top of that. So who knows? I'm not. My goal here with this illustration is not an homage to Chris Payne or study. I've already done that. You can see that on my website and on my YouTube channel. I did a self-portrait in the style of CF Payne. That's probably the pinnacle of my CF Payne experiments. Enjoyed it very much. It was a lot of fun. Let's go to a smaller brush now. There's lots of room in this technique for happy accidents. Do you see that? Where I'm allowing the paint to be the paint, allowing the stuff to. It's not. I'm not being a hyper controller here. I'm letting there be a fair amount of the medium is autonomous. Has a mind of its own, has a choice of its own, and I'm responding to it visually, which honestly is that characterizes all good painting, in my opinion. Is the painting process. You allow the medium to have a high degree of a mind of its own, if you will. I'm thinking, of course, with every stroke, so to speak, that the light is coming from the right. That's easy. I don't get any big, credit for getting that right. That's pretty standard. There will be more, whether I use Chris's technique or not, there will be more use of colored pencil. His last stage, actually there's some discrepancy in my research of his technique. Sometimes his last stage is acrylic plus colored pencil. Other times his last stage is oil plus colored pencil. And I don't know if that's because he goes back and forth or because I'm misreading or misinterpreting his what he has online. I don't know. Either way, and I think I've done it myself both ways. I am not doing very well in a rate per hour. I am not charging my client enough for this amount of work. Welcome to the wild and wonderful world of being an artist, right? I've both underestimated how long this would take me, or underestimated how much fun I was going to have doing this, right? So There you go. Welcome again to the world of being an artist more than a businessman. I will sleep happier tonight. My wife and I are going out for dinner. Let's just talk about when I set down my brushes and go out for a nice supper with my lovely wife, Nancy. Will I be happier if I've made a lot of money, or happier if I've made some fantastic artwork? And the answer is, it's kind of a toss-up, folks. You can tell I'm such an artist. I mean, that should be real obvious which of those I'm supposed to be happier about, right? I'm supposed to be happier about making really good money. But I'm an artist. I just can't help it. I'm more excited about beauty. Okay, here's a little disclaimer. I find myself at this moment, now it could change in a day or a week, but I find myself at this moment that my bills are paid. I'm not wondering, where my next tank of gas is going to go. So that impacts my attitude a little bit. Does that make sense? So I'm feeling like I'm not all pressured. I feel like I can take the liberty of taking some time to do some killer artwork. I just realized, though, I'm not sure that this client, he probably thinks that after he pays me, that these illustrations go to him. I'm not sure. I've had that conversation with him. Technically, in the illustration world, the illustrations, generally speaking, belong to the illustrator. I don't know if you know that or not. I usually don't worry about it too much, but having spent this much time and attention, I'd really like to keep these. And part of the reason is it's better now than it used to be, because what my client is going to get from me is a JPEG on his computer, right? But still, he's liable to think, oh no, I paid for those illustrations, they're mine. And I probably won't fight him on that. I will have, whether he gets it or not, of course, I will have the images on my website. So in a sense, they become a part of my, if they make the grade, if they're good enough, they become a part of my everlasting portfolio, which is my website, dannelsonart.com. By the way, my website, speaking of which, dannelsonart.com, I really do treat it like a portfolio. I don't try to sell stuff from my website. There's a link there to Fine Art America where you can buy prints, but it's not generally a merchant website. The main purpose of my dannelsonart.com, frankly, is to blow people away. That's what it's there for. I'm not recommending that. Again, I'm probably thinking more like an artist than a businessman at that point. But that's what it is. There's over 800 pieces of art on my website, and that explains that. Why there's so much artwork. Well, 25 different categories. Is part of that. This is turning out nice. You can ask me, are you having fun? The answer is heck yeah. So that's, not being paid enough, but part of the consolation is, yeah, but dang, I sure am going to do a nice illustration. See, it's already taking on a real charming, the soft fuzzy edges. And I can still see the colored pencil. Right there, they're pushed way back, so it doesn't even look like colored pencil anymore. It looks like I don't know what it looks like. Right? That's, again, you look at Chris Payne stuff and you go, how did he do that? Well, that's a very good question. I give you the answer in my broadcast, but you can't tell by looking. You cannot tell by looking what it is. There's no way anybody would be able to look at his artwork and analyze what's going on there. That's already happening here. Casual or even a careful observer would have no idea how this was done. That's kind of fun. It's fun because it's just so visually stimulating, just interesting. Anyway, I ramble. Maybe that when I start rambling, it might mean it's time for me to take a break. But I do have lunch waiting for me downstairs. I hope it's on the stove, or it's getting very cold. Isn't that fun? Now, I still have a pretty good tooth left here, which is encouraging. I'm thinking. Hey, Marcus. Yes, in fact, that's the main stressor on me today is I want to be working on that painting in my garage. Thanks for asking. I'm really excited about that. It's sort of where my heart is mostly today. But I have this. I've got a client here that is waiting for this illustration. He's been fairly patient. But yeah, I don't know if I'm going to get. No, I'm not. I just looked at my. Time flies when you're having fun. It's already 4:30. Okay, I just answered that question. Nope. Rats. Manana. And I'm very excited, as maybe you can tell if you watched me last time. I'm very excited about this new season, perhaps. New era, perhaps. I won't know. The time will tell. Isn't that just charming? And again, I'm not bragging. You know that I'm not boasting. It's like, dang, isn't that funny? Look at how that turned out. Yay, Chris! I'm so glad he shared with us his technique. By the way, I've been working on 2 books for years now. Forgive me, I don't even talk about them very much anymore. I think probably if they ever turn into books, I don't know, but they're probably going to turn into broadcasts instead of books. One is very simple, how to paint. It's called The Breakable Laws of Painting, which I'm very excited about. The other one is much bigger and much heavier, and I've been working on it much longer. It doesn't have a title, but it's about modern art, basically. And I'm trying to explain the world of modern art for everybody, for the 99% of the population that can't figure out what the heck is going on. It's neither a love fest nor a rave. I don't shake my fist, and even though sometimes I feel like it, but I don't just shake my fist and say all kinds of bad things about modern art. There's enough people in the world are already doing a pretty good job of that. You can find them easily. Nor is it, like I said, a love fest. Like my art history professors in college all had orgasmic pleasure, delight. I'm exaggerating to be ornery about everything that happened in the art world. I believe much of what happened was not good. Very definitely not good. Anyway, I was just going to mention one of the big questions in the world of art over the last century is, what is beauty? Is there such a thing as beauty, and what is it? And one of the debates for anybody who even admits that there is such a thing as beauty is beauty exist only in the mind or soul of human beings, individual human beings, or is there such a thing as objective beauty? And for the most part, the consensus, I think, among most philosophers has been the former, that there's no such thing as objective external beauty. It's just in your head, so to speak, in the head of the viewer. And they can make a very good point. And there was a season in my philosophical journeys where I thought, yeah, that's probably the correct answer. But I've gone back on that. I don't believe that is true. Now, I think there is such a thing as you can actually identify things that are, in fact, beautiful. Now, you don't do that stupidly, because you get shot down in a heartbeat by the people with the other argument if you don't know what they're saying. And their point is very well taken. I was watching on YouTube. I've been watching a lot lately just for fun. we have this little routine in my home. My grandchildren all love me to practice my trumpet. I practice virtually every day. And they like to practice because they know that when I'm practicing, I'm going to put on usually a YouTube video or YouTube videos and watch. So they don't care about my practicing. They just want to come and watch TV because TV is like a treat around here. It's not something that, they can do all the time. So they say, Bika, that's my name. You want to practice your trumpet? So anyway, so we watch things, and I tend to watch things that you don't have to listen to the soundtrack because, of course, I'm practicing trumpet, so you can't hear. So one of the things I've been watching lately is these people sawing logs into slabs. And these people go into ecstasy, peals of ecstasy over the beauty of the wood grain as it's exposed as after they cut it. The same thing could be said of a geode, right? It's a gnarly hunk of gray stone on the outside, and then when you smash it open, it's an absolute hard to describe, of amethyst and all kinds of other crystals in beautiful pristine condition. Amazing. Anyway, watching the guys go nuts over the logs that they're cutting, that's made me think. See, I think beauty is objective. There's such a thing as beautiful wood grain and wood grain, just not so beautiful. Anyway, and I say that because I think that the things I'm feeling about this little illustration. By the way, I'm going back to colored pencil now for just a minute. Before I go to the next layer, I want to solidify some of my earlier marks. Doesn't matter whether I'm tracing them exactly. Doesn't care. Doesn't matter to me. But I think if I go to the oil layer at this stage, or pastels, or spraying for that matter, if I spray it, I'm going to lose completely some of this first drawing. And I don't want to do that because I don't want to have to redraw it completely from scratch. Anyway, so I think and beauty, as you can imagine, it's very difficult to define, but I do think it's actually definable. Words like variety, order, variety and order would be two of the terms that could be called upon most heavily to define things that are in fact beautiful. And I contend that all human beings, every age, that is young to old, every age through history, every culture, would find similar things, a remarkable degree of affinity or unanimity is shared between human beings about what human beings tend to find beautiful and not. And again, two of the main words would be variety and order. Order and chaos, a tension between order and chaos. Too much order, not beautiful. Too much chaos, not beautiful. It's a balance. And that's, frankly, what I'm experiencing in looking at this illustration. There's a certain degree of order, and there's a certain degree of disorder. And it's the tension between those two. And if I get them just right, most human beings will respond. Now, the big category of people that will not respond that way are, in fact, people who are affected or infected even by the philosophies of the 20th century. I don't know how to say it. I'm a student of their thought, certainly, and a critic of their thought. But not a critic, not a judge of their. If I had the same background and so on, it's never our place to judge. I would be a Jackson Pollock if I had his personality, his background, his circumstance, and so on and so on and so on and so forth. And by the way, I'm certainly not a despiser or a hater of Jackson Pollock. But do I think that his, does he have skill comparable, say, to Michelangelo? Are you kidding? No, not even close. Does he have skill? Oh yes, yeah. They all have skill, but is it artistic skill? No, it's socio-political personality skill primarily. Picasso. Was Picasso skilled? Oh, absolutely. He was a genius. A genius at what? Art? Now he's pretty good. Was he a genius? No. He was socio-political personality genius. And that accounts for much, that applies to much of the art of the 20th century. And again, they would disagree with me vehemently about my, first of all, assertion that there is such a thing as beauty. They would say, no, there's no such thing as beauty. And of course, I disagree with them, not without sobriety, not without having given careful attention to their arguments and so on. And neither do I castigate any artist, any modern artists. Well, most of them you don't have to castigate because they all died young of drug overdoses. That's an exaggeration, but those of you who know the history know it's way too accurate. So I don't need to be critical of these poor people who were miserable and died miserable deaths because of their miserableness. So again, they don't deserve our opprobrium. They might deserve our pity, but even that only in a certain measure. What really got me going on this is, even as an illustrator, am I aiming for beauty? And the answer is heck yes, there is. And the only two parameters I've given, there are others, of course, but is between this tension between order and chaos, or surprise and structure, in every regard, in every arena whatsoever. In this case, that it's very obvious the tension between texture and realism. Is there some realism in this? Of course there is. Everybody can tell there's two boys walking across a field. That tickles a certain part of our brain. But there's also a great deal of disorder in the illustration, and that was achieved by this brilliant technique invented by Chris Payne, where I've done several layers. A drawing, mostly orderly. Then a acrylic, semi-order, right? Not being real careful, kind of a messy painting. And then watercolor, very much disorder. But then carving back with wet rags, wet brushes, carving back into the disorder to bring a higher degree of order. And now again with the pencils, I'm doing a degree of order. So that's just one way, one way among many to describe what I think our brain, the uncluttered human brain, and most people who were fine artists in the 20th century, many of them do not have uncluttered brains. They have very, very cluttered brains. Their eye is no longer innocent because their art has been very much mixed with politics and philosophy and so on. So they can no longer look at anything with childlike innocence. Even though that concept of looking at things with childlike innocence is very much a child of 20th century or modern art. And when I use the term modern art here, by the way, I'm using it in the broadest sense. I'm not making a distinction between broad and between modern and contemporary, even though we could make that distinction. But I'm just using the term the way ordinary people use it at the moment. So I've been chewing on this quite a bit just in recent months. I've been working on this book, by the way, for 10 years, 15 years. And it now probably is about 400 pages thick if I were to write it as a book. I've written almost the entire thing on my phone. So technology had to come forth to make me even have a chance of writing a book. I'm not going to sit down at a typewriter, just not my calling in life at this season. But I always have my phone with me, and I can always speak a few words as they come to mind on the subject in my phone, no matter where I am. So that's how those 400 pages have been written. I'm looking and thinking again. So at the end of this stage, if I continue, which I will, as I continue with this pencil, In my mind, I'm going to have a little bit too much order. So let me, in fact, try to back off a little bit as I continue the pencil. Not be quite as strong, confident, predictable in my pencil lines. Maybe that'll help a little bit. But I was going to say that in spite of the fact that there's a little bit too much order in my mind at the end of this stage, the painting's not finished, right? The illustration is not finished. I've got one huge layer of disorder to throw onto the thing. Again, that is the, either, if I go with Chris Payne's technique, is a layer of oil, or if I go with my technique, which is spray and then pastel. See, this is, it's unfixed pastel. You can see that it still comes off on my finger there. A quick insight is how at least how I think, and I usually want to say how an artist thinks, how a real artist thinks. Again, when you're doing an illustration, you have to think about the psychology, the background, what's happening on many levels. It's not just a matter of drawing a picture, drawing a pretty picture, even less so that, right? I'm a fair student of human beings. You have to be an artist. You have to be a student and of human beings and human nature, so to speak. And one of the things I've observed is that when two friends are walking together, they tend, not always, but they tend to fall into step with each other. They tend to walk left, right, left, right, left, right, and assume a similar physical disposition. So it's definitely that it's not accidental that they're both walking here, left foot forward, tool on right shoulder. It's not because I didn't have enough imagination to put them in different position. No, I went with this decision, and again, I've already worked it out somewhat on the earlier illustration, right? But it's not accidental. It's because they're friends and they're kind of in a happy mood. They've been working together. Now it looks like to me like they're done working or they're moving somewhere else. So they're kind of walking and whistling. Almost kind of, this boy in the back almost looks like he's whistling. So again, that's just part of the job of being an illustrator. Is you have to be a little bit of a psychiatrist too. You have to think about the inner thinking and workings of the people that you're drawing. If you're drawing people. I'm not claiming that I'm any big shakes or brilliant or genius. Or, I don't feel like. That's why I want to say this is what all good artists do. This is you not. But it is what non-artists do not think about. Most non-artists think that a person is an artist because of what they can do with their hands. As you know, I usually rail against that pretty aggressively. No, too aggressively, as it turns out over the years, because I do actually have skill in my hands, even though I'm sort of reluctant to admit it, because that's what most people think, is that my skill is in my hands, and I'm usually go to great lengths to say, no, it's between our ears, not what's between our fingers. But then it turns out, oh, you know what? I actually do have skill in my hands. So that's a fairly recent discovery. Some of you have been hearing me talk about that in the last little while. So there we go. Just about a perfect balance between order and disorder. A little bit too much order with the pencil, but I'm going to fix it. Okay, it's decision time. Yeah, David, the hose right over his head. That is not intentional. I'm not sure if that's what you're saying, but that was an accident. Looks a little threatening, doesn't it? Not making a statement there. I did not think about that. I'm gonna lift out just a little bit more here and there, because once I seal this, there's no more removing any more watercolor. But I'm not in bad shape. I'm close to the right balance. I think I've got just about the right amount of watercolor still showing. The drawing as a whole is a little bit too dark. But again, not to worry. If I take the route I took earlier, I could actually go straight from this, where I'm at right now, I could go straight from this to pastels. And you can imagine why that's going to work. Listen. Right? Can you hear that? There's still a fair degree of fair amount of tooth on there. I think it would take a pastel quite happily, quite handily. That would probably be the quickest technique open to me right now. So in other words, unlike on this one, I did a spray. I did lacquer matte, very, very toothy spray, which lightened everything because has such a tooth that it actually creates a haze on the drawing. Okay, tell you what, I need to take a break. Let me read your comments before I go. And I've been doing this for hours. My goodness. So there's lots of chats, and I won't respond to all of them, just to some of them. Hey, Donna Lobes, good to have you on board. You're probably not here anymore. That was over 2 hours ago. Tanan, thank you. I am versatile. I enjoy it very often. Appreciate it. Lots of happy birthdays. Appreciate it. Oh, it's Evan's birthday, too. That's right. Oh, my God, Donna. My goodness. Happy birthday to Evan. How fun. How fun. I'll try to remember to send him a text later on if I get around to it. Jane, good to see you again. Femox, good to see you. Oh my goodness, you guys, I'm embarrassed. Thank you for all the Susan Zera remembers hee-haw. Tell you what, I'll leave the picture in the frame here and get my iPad. It's David, my friend in northern Quebec, 5 feet of snow. You're getting a workout, David. I need to come up there and get an exercise. Oh my goodness. Harrison had to leave our broadcast to go to a painting class. What a life. Good for you. Good for you. Oh yeah, Ziploc. Great idea, David. Good. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Never thought about it. Silly. I use Ziplocs extensively. Thank you. Good idea. David did catch me being humble. David is my humble police. Oh my goodness. Marcus, glad I could be with you today, my friend. I hope you're feeling better really soon. Oh, David says freezing acrylics is a no-no. Of course, that makes perfect sense. Thank you, David. Good tips today, man. Appreciate it. Okay, Ziploc, not a freeze. And that makes perfect sense. Yeah, but the hole over his head seems weird. Sorry. Too late. Too late. I'm going to leave that weirdness there, I think. Okay. Thank you, guys. Been great fun. I'm going to take a break. I won't stop this broadcast. Let me move you again just for a minute, since some of you are watching who've never seen my face, perhaps. Hang on. There we go. All right. I just need to take a breath of air, so to speak, and think about which way I want to go with this. Do I want to go the layer of oil or go straight to pastel? Let me describe the oil for those 2 of you who are still watching, perhaps. Oh, 18 of you watching. Cool. I have it around here somewhere. Okay, he mixes a permanent green oil permanent green and I think a dioxazine violet. Mixes those two together to get essentially a cool gray, a bluish cool gray. And again, smears that, brushes that over the entire painting, small painting, brushes over the whole thing, lets that dry for maybe an hour, not very long, but it's very thin and it's oil. Then he comes back with a kneaded eraser, right? One of these, best eraser ever invented, with a kneaded eraser, and lifts out whatever cool gray he doesn't want there. All right, I think we're back on. And I'm going to point you back down at my artwork. I hope you're enjoying this new technology as I am. The technology of the the camera tripod that I built that points straight down at my table. I look forward to using this very much in the months and years to come. So I've decided, in case you can't tell, I've decided not to be a purist. I realized that, and I took a break, got a quick bite to eat, that the main impulses that were pushing me towards following Chris's technique were those of wanting to have fun and wanting to be true to his technique versus the value of just get the job done. So I sort of came to my senses and said, wait a minute, no. This is a lot of fun, but no, I need to get the job done. So I did only one thing then, and that is I took this illustration outside and gave it a quick shot of a workable fixative. And because just so that I would have a fairly uniform tooth, or a little bit more, I should say, a little bit more uniform tooth throughout the illustration. As you may know, if you use workable fixative, it is a very light tooth. It cannot, if you have a super slick surface, you can't really hit it with a shot of workable fixative and then you have tooth. No, you barely have tooth. So anyway, but I thought, well, it'll even out the texture for me a little bit so that I have a little bit more equal tooth throughout the illustration. And then I'm hitting it with pastels. And my big challenge here is for me is going to be not to get too tight. As you may have heard me say before the break, that if beauty resides somewhere in the tension between order and chaos, I felt like my illustration was leaning a little bit too much toward the order side when I took a break. So that would mean I want to be fairly careful to actually to impart a little bit more chaos into the illustration, which means, among other things, in this case would mean covering up some of my black pencil lines, one of the last things that I did, because it's just a little bit too outlining, just a little bit. It's sort of quite a bit like the way I use pencils in my oil paintings, right? I want them there because I like the the contrast, the texture, how the contrast of the, how the contrast of the, no, how the pencil, the texture of the pencil contrasts with the contrast of the paint. So it's sort of similar here. I like the pencil, but I don't want too much of it. And right now I feel like there's just a little bit too much of it. So not a big problem, because I just can diminish it or cover it up somewhat with this, with the pastel. But I do want to be careful here that I don't slip into too much coloring in the lines, right? That would insert a whole bunch of order, too much order into my painting. And it's already, like I said, it's already slightly, in my opinion could be wrong, of course, but in my opinion, it's a little bit too orderly the way it is right now. So I'm want to use the colored pencils not to so much increase the order. Oh, it's actually doing both. It is increasing and decreasing the order. But that means I have to be careful not to do what I'm doing right now, which is color in the lines. Little reflection. Let me pull up my old illustration again for just a minute and point out that when I did this one, the last thing I did is I came back with white gouache on a brush and did all these highlights. And I kind of liked the effect. But again, in that illustration, we were aiming toward a partly adult and partly juvenile or children's style illustration. And my client has changed his mind and now thinks we're aiming really just at an adult audience. And I affirm that decision on his part. I think that's probably a good idea. So I'm taking out a little bit of the order, if you will. Had using that terminology earlier in that conversation. So I want the outlines in this illustration, frankly, to be slightly messier than the outlines in this one. Right? This was my, oh, I love the cloud here, by the way. But down here, the lines are just a little bit too regular. So in this illustration, I've tried to make them more irregular. And as you saw a minute ago, I'm using a Q-tip to blend some of the pastel. Just a word then about can I put a fixative on top of this illustration when I'm done? Can I use a fixative? And the answer is not really. Darn. I wish that I could. And anybody who's ever done any pastel work, you know why we don't put fixative on. Because the fixative actually eats, especially the light colors, and almost everything I'm doing in this stage of the painting, of the illustration, is going to be light color. So there is one thing we could do, but it doesn't buy us a whole lot, and that is you can do one layer of pastel like I'm doing right now, then hit it very carefully with a light fixative, and it will eat up a considerable percentage of the lights, especially the white. And then you come back and do the white again. So you can do that with pastels, as far as in regards to fixatives. But you really can't use, unfortunately. So that means that this illustration if it was framed, it would have to go behind glass, which is certainly, in my mind, the biggest downside of pastels is that very factor. Introducing a little more intense. I want a variety of blues, as you can imagine, in the sky. And much of the variety, I'm going to use a finger now, much of the variety has already been achieved by the layers, especially the watercolor layer that I did earlier. All this stuff up here. Excuse me, I think I have a sneeze coming on. I need to lighten. Pastels, for those of you who use them or don't, they're very popular with young artists and beginner artists for this. Now, they're popular with masters too, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying anything bad about them. But they're popular with young artists because it's called a direct. It's a very direct medium. That is to say that they do what you tell them to do, right? It's like, here's the difference between an end of a brush. Here's the tip of a brush. It bends, right? Bendy, bendy. Tip of a pencil does not bend. So this is far more predictable and controllable. There's the word. There's the rub. Much more controllable than a brush. Way at the other end of the spectrum, in some ways, as far as non-control, as non-direct medium would be airbrush, because you physically, at least with the airbrush, you physically never touch the surface at all with any tool. So that's a different. It's a good distinction to have it in your mind. The difference between a direct and an indirect medium. And generally speaking, the direct mediums are very controllable, and that's the reason why so many beginners or students tend to gravitate. And again, I'm not saying anything. I mean, there are absolute masters that use pastels. It's not limited to beginners, but there are a lot of beginners that do like pastels, and mostly for that very reason, because they're controllable. There's the danger. You hear the danger in that word, right? Now, I don't know if I'm going to do what I did on the last illustration and come back and do some white highlights. Excuse me. I might if I can't get the whites, the lights that I want, the punch that I want. I'm using here a kneaded eraser, by the way, to lift out some of that dark gray blue that I just put in. There's just a little bit too much of it. But that's nice. There we go. Generally speaking, in pastel, I think the rule applies most of the time that you do darks first, lights last. You finish with lights. The same reason we don't like seeing. I usually say we don't like seeing dark paint on top of light paint. When it comes to pastel, we're not talking about paint, but you could expand it and say, generally speaking, we don't like seeing dark pigment is what I meant to say. We don't like seeing dark pigment on top of light. That blue-gray is still too much of it. That's funny. A little bit went a long way. But easy fix, easy fix. Just blend over it with some white. There we go. Oh, that looks nice now. In fact, it looks so nice, I'm going to do some more of it down here. Of course, as you understand, I'm trying to indicate the shady side of this storm cloud, big cumulonimbus cloud. Also, by the way, in putting that big cloud in there is a very intentional composition design element, very traditional in a sense, but putting them inside a triangle almost even drawing a circle around this, more of a triangle than a circle. But again, very old, well-established trick of composition. Not by any means not unusual or unusually clever. Just standard, but it's much more interesting than just no clouds or chaotic clouds or even striated. You know, that would be probably the next best thing, would be like a fan-shaped cloud, like that. But I felt like, just because I want this illustration to look a little bit like an illustration. I'm not sure how to say that. I'm trying to connect it to kind of traditional, old-timey artwork. And again, I'm sure that's because, in my mind, this whole scene is taking place in the 19th century. And that's also part of the reason why. So I decided to go with this modified Chris Payne technique because the story takes place in the 19th century, so 150, 75 years ago. And in our culture, these kind of muted sepia tone, brownish tones convey that kind of old-fashioned feeling. I don't have to tell you, so to speak. I don't have to tell the viewers that this scene took place a long time ago. My hope is that you can tell that it took place a long time ago just by looking at it, because of the colors and the style of the illustration, including the rather classic backdrop of enfolding them inside a big triangle. So very traditional composition is what I'm probably the best way to put it. Again, I say this to you all because I think it's the kind of thing that non-artists would probably be astounded. I think. Well, I know they would, because over the years I've had to deal with clients, including advertising agents, including account executives, who really ought to know better. But I've had to deal with clients and ad agencies and so forth that don't understand what goes into the making of a good illustration. And again, they tend to think that an artist is good because they can draw good pictures with their hands. So if you're an illustrator, thinking of being an illustrator, then I'm hoping some of my words are inspiring, or what's the word I want to say? Two words. One is instructive. Yeah, this is how you have to do it. If you're an illustrator, you have to work hard, not just at drawing, but at thinking. And secondly, I hope it's somewhat inspirational. Like, if you go, oh man, that sounds like I want to do that too. I want to think about things like that. Then maybe you could have a career as an illustrator. By no means am I asserting that every illustrator on the planet does everything that I do. In fact, don't tell anybody, but I know that they don't. Not all of them do. Part of getting old is finding out how you're the same and how you're different from other people. For me, part of the journey has been discovering, that not every artist does. Some of them are really good at drawing pictures, and they I don't know, they don't do quite the same process. I'm not saying they're worse or lesser for that. We're just different. So of course you're getting my perspective without apology. That's what. And of course I like my approach, because if I didn't like it, I would change my approach. It's pretty simple, right? Took me a long time to get this old. I won't relinquish my lessons quickly. Let's do a little bit of brighter green now down here on these, especially the closer tier of foliage. Why is there often a lower tier of plant growth around the edge of a field? If there is, it shows you that the field has been there for a while. So if these kids are walking across this field in 1840, that might be a bit of a misguide. But when a field is first cleared, of course, they cut down all the trees and so on, and the field goes right up to the woods, and it's a vertical line at the edge of the woods. But the longer the field remains arable, remains in operation as a field, first weeds, and then small trees, and then larger and larger, as they get larger, tend to encroach inward from the edge of the field, tend to. So you end up with the bigger trees behind, smaller in front, because these smaller ones are newer growth. That's also why they're a paler green, by the way, because they're different kind of plants, smaller plants, weed trees, weed plants, frankly, typically. So I decided to, plus it gives me an excuse to have a little fun with color. A little bit too tight. Let's go back and mess up some of that just a little bit. There we go. It's better. I want a brown color. Here we go. Again, I attribute this little principle to Thomas Kincaid. And I like saying good things about Thomas Kincaid because I like coming against snobbery. We're all supposed to hate him, which is ridiculous. But anyway, so one of the tricks he showed us all, if you paid attention, is that whenever there's a row, a bank, a hillside of trees, whatever, in this case, a row of trees, make the trees of various color, various shades of green. So I have a couple here that are yellowish, that one yellowish, then pale green, and so on. And then one that's a little bluer and so on. Good trick. Go Thomas. It was a lot more fun to talk about him when he was still alive. It was fun to pick on him, so to speak. Not as much fun to pick on people after they're gone. Hang on just a second. I've lost my monitor, and that might not matter to you, but it sure will matter if we start getting static and I don't know it. So hang on just a second. All right, we're back. All right, so just a little bit more blue in one of these trees over here, just for variety, just for fun. Want some more light on this side of this cloud. Let it go at that for now. And some light down here on the field. I haven't done anything on the boys yet, have I? That's the focal point of the illustration, of course, is these two boys. And I'm evidently saving that for last. Let's get all the background knocked in, locked in, knocked or locked in. Before I tackle the focal point. Little green shoots coming up. I did not look up little green shoots. I did not. But I drew the line today at what do cotton plants look like when they first come up. I drew the line at that. There's no guarantee this is supposed to be a cotton field anyway, but. If I keep them small enough, nobody can identify what kind of plant it is. They all come up the same way, little pale green dots. All right, people, boys, skin, flesh tone. It's pretty close to finished already. Let's get some real pale yellow ochre maybe for the highlight here. Very close to enough right there. I don't have a great collection of pastel pencils. There's my pastel pencils for what they're worth, for what it's worth. These down here. Most of those I've just actually collected over the years here and there, never actually set out to buy a bunch of pastel pencils, just picked them up somehow. It's funny how that happens. No tooth left there. I could. Okay, let's get some light on this boy's dirty shirt. He's been working all day. It's sweat, grime, dirt, mud, mosquito bite, blood, you name it. That's what's on his shirt there. This is a working day. So here especially I'm coloring outside the lines quite vigorously, intentionally using this white to soften. It does visually, it really doesn't make any sense for there to be a black line on this top edge, does it? I've got a problem here with this hand though, because the same is true there, and I've got no tooth left on that paper whatsoever, so not sure why that happened. So I'm not able to put any white, so I might come back and do a tiny bit of white gouache there. I've got, for some reason, a red hanky in his back pocket. Why red? Beats me. Just a fun excuse for a little shock of color there, that's all. Just a word about sunlight and the play of sunlight on an object. Let's start by talking about when sun is hitting a building. Imagine that you can see two sides of the building. One side has sun hitting it, the other side is in shade. Okay, not at all an unusual circumstance, right? Left to one's own devices, according to my observations and my own experience, left to our own devices, we artists will under-exaggerate, if I can use that term, make up that term, we'll under-exaggerate the difference between those two light effects. So I'm going to give you a formula. The question could be asked, so smarty pants, what's the difference in value between the sunny side of a building and the shady side of a building? You ready? Okay, so first of all, to answer that question, I want you to imagine a 10-point value scale. That is like and I have several around here. Wish I could put my hands on one right away. Let me look real quick, just see if I've got one right up here on this desk. Oh, I do. Fantastic. Okay. I'm going to back you up. When I teach drawing classes, like semester-long classes, I have all my students create one of these. This is graphite pencil. And there's two rows here, non-blended and blended. That is, this row I used a blending stub. These, just the pencil. Anyway, there's a value scale, 0 to 10. Well, actually, it's not. This is according to the pencil. Sorry, my mistake. But 8H, 7H hard, 7 hard, 6, all the way on to 8B, okay? But that's a value scale. So the question is, if this was a 10-degree, which 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, it's 10. What's the difference between a shady side of a building and the light side? The answer is 5, differential of 5. So if the dark side of the building is this color, the sunny side will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that color. If the sunny side is this color, the dark side will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whoa, look at that. But most people, if they don't know this, they'll make the differential something like 3, and we won't do it enough. Okay, so that applies to things like hard edge buildings. What about clothing now? What's the differential between the dark and light side of clothing? And believe it or not, it's even, in most cases, or many cases, even more extreme. I haven't done this. I could do it. I was going to say do a search. Just do Google search. Say, man, standing in the sun. Something like that. Something about sun. Man in the sunlight. And just look for images. And I'm not talking about skin tone, so I want people with clothes on. Look at the sun hitting their clothes. In many, many, many cases, the side of their clothing that is facing the sun, right along the edge, will be virtually perfectly white, a zero value, just a sliver. I can't do that here. I've run out of tooth. But again, it's way more than most people think. And myself included, I think I underdo this on a regular basis. Not always, but way too often. I don't have enough highlights on the sunny side of a person's clothing. It's very extreme. The sun is super powerful. And again, left to our own devices as artists, we tend to underdo it rather than overdo it. I'm unable to overdo it here because I have no tooth on the paper there. Once I've gone over it once or twice, that's the end of it. But it's just something really good to think about. You know what? I think I am going to come back and do some gouache because there's too many places in here where I really want to punch in a light highlight, and I find myself unable to do it. I'm not going to do it as heavy-handed. This is really stylized, but I think I'll just do it more subtly than that illustration. But there's too many places in here where I'm really trying to get some highlights, and I find myself unable to achieve that with these pencils. So decision just made. There we go. All right, so I'm essentially finished. I can do a couple of things. One is any place where I want more dark values, like on both boys' hair, actually, and under their hats. I'm going all the way back to the original Prismacolor pencil again. So I think I'll probably actually be doing some of this for a few minutes. That is pushing the darks and pushing the lights. Pushing the lights with gouache. Okay, so since you're here, since some of you are still here, I have, here we go, a little cup that I typically put fresh white gouache in. And then I spray it, thin it down with water just a little bit. And I get one of my new super cheap, I mean that in both senses of the word. These are not quality instruments, but you know what? They work pretty well. We are so lucky. We're so blessed, my goodness. For centuries, artists had to make their own brushes. We can get these brushes so cheap. Better than anything Rembrandt ever used. Let's zoom in a little bit again. There's some dark lines especially that I really want to get rid of, like on the back of the boy's heel, on the back of his jeans here. White gouache, what a great invention. Yeah, the top of his arm here doesn't really need any dark line. There, I like that better. The top of his hat, likewise, doesn't need any dark line. The highlight on his hoe, I can do that better now. So I think I'll be doing that for a while. I am going to end this eternal broadcast. Thank you all guys for anybody that have joined me today. I have had fun. I haven't made a lot of money, but getting the job done, getting closer to getting it done, and had a great time visiting with you all, sharing this time with you. I am going to finish the illustration. I won't finish it today. My wife and I are going out for dinner to celebrate my day. But it's real predictable what it is I'm going to be doing here. I'm going to be doing highlights with white and highlight dark lights, dark tones with Prismacolor pencil, colored pencil. Last thing I'll do, let's get it real white edge along the sunny edge of this boy's shirt. Fine with me if we lose some edges, right? Fine with me if it blends into the sky. Fine, fine, fine. It's a good place for a lost edge. There, isn't that fun? Bring it in real close. Is it in focus? I think it is. All right, let me give her earthquake ride again for just a second. There we go. Thanks, friends. Appreciate your company. Oh, let me catch your chats before I go here real quick. Where did we leave off? Yeah, Susan, good question. How the speckled effect came in. Oh, when I stopped mid-sentence, maybe I need to let more time go before I stop talking, before I turn off my broadcast. Thanks for that. Thanks for that tip. Julian, I figured you figured that out. They're pastel pencils, right? You probably figured that out. Could I use transparent gesso underneath this last layer, underneath the pastel? Yes, I could. Not on top of the gesso, of course. I'm assuming that's what you mean. Yes, I could have done that. Not a bad idea. I might try that next time. Thanks, guys. Been great fun. Appreciate it. If you enjoy this, please leave comments and share. And if you don't enjoy it, then I'm sorry. As I usually say, let's just keep that between you and me. I hope that tomorrow I'll be at least much of the day out in my garage painting my exciting 7-foot tall painting. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.